Hey everyone, this is Colin O'Toole from Below Deck Mediterranean, and you're listening to Jim and Florence on the Forum.
This is Jim Jax, and welcome to the Forum. We are still standing. Some of you have given us some DMs to make sure that we're still alive. We are. We've had just an incredible last month. Everything is really flowing and going well. We thank all of you. Last week in some of our interviews, we didn't get a chance to do the shout outs that we really wanted to. Our guest was in a hurry, so we really wanted to get this done. So again, we thank everyone, especially Laura Oakman and the Galvanized team. We hope you guys, it's exciting that football's coming back. We hope you guys do fantastic. Our celebrity book club just blew up. Kathy Ireland gave us so many thank yous. We almost told her to stop. We almost did, but we let her keep thanking us. If you could believe it, we've been given the thumbs up to the great Stephen King. So we are going to be doing for his latest book, we're going to be doing another video review. We'll put it on YouTube. It's just an honor to be doing it. He's a very nice man. And then we have Ron Fuller, the Tennessee stud, the Fuller family, iconic wrestling family, especially down south in the Tennessee area. It's just amazing. He's the nicest guy. He has a book, and we'll be doing a review on his book after. He's very excited. He's been a friend of the show. We also like to thank Matt Hamilton, who came on one of our shows. He's obviously the producer and on-air talent for Good Morning Football. He's been such a good guy, and we support him in everything that we do. John Hendricks from SI. Hey, John, we thank you for coming on Floors Truly. He did a great job. The .1 show on Floors Truly so far. So thank you so much, John, for your kindness. He also does Forbes Sports for Forbes.com, and he's just an amazing writer. He started being a fan blogger, and he's become such an icon. So we're so happy about that. And thank you to Julie DeCaro because she's been so kind to us. She came on one of our shows, and she really did a great job. It was a lot of fun. She was a real hoot, and she's just fantastic. So thank you to all the great fans. We have some more shout outs, but we'll save those for the next show. But we've been so honored by all of you, and we really humbly appreciate it. And the leads, obviously, Emmy Lentino, Steve Leeds, for their amazing 55,000 views for their latest show on Facebook, and we've been sharing it. We had Steve on our show. We did a quick one. That thing is blowing up on YouTube. It's just thank you all. And Steve's become a good friend as well. And Emmy's obviously someone near and dear to our heart. So when you have people like this, celebrities that are so good and so kind and they're so talented, we love to share these people and their stories with you. And we sure have one of those today, someone we've admired from afar, and we get to actually talk to her. Why don't you introduce our guest, Florence?
Yes, I am so excited to welcome the award-winning national sports anchor for Fox Sports Radio, Deb Carson. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you, Florence, and thank you, Jim. It's great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so honored. And forget Dan Patrick and Colin Cowherd. I am all about Deb Carson. So that's all I got to say about that. But Deb, you've had a fascinating life, and I've had some friends that kind of had a little bit of the lifestyle that you have when you were young. Your father was in NASA. Why don't you talk as much as you can talk without being too hush-hush, but why don't you talk about your dad and his work, and just you had to move a lot. What was that like as a kid?
We did. Well, he worked for NASA as well as the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, and with the Army as well. He was more on the financial management side. So he was a comptroller or controller, however you choose to say it. Wow. But we did move around a lot. I was born in Washington, D.C. He had worked at the Pentagon there. He worked in Bethesda. He worked at Goddard in that area. Then for middle school, we moved to Panama City, Florida. And then when I was about to go into high school, we moved to Kingsville, Texas. So we have been all over that southeastern part of the country, all different climates, very lovely people in all of those places. But as you can imagine, you learn to adapt. We have a very close family, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, whenever we picked up and moved, it was just us. We didn't have friends in these places, so we had to adapt and make friends quickly. And we have amazing parents. My father, unfortunately, we lost him a few years ago, but still have a brother who actually followed me and moved to Los Angeles a couple of years after I did. But after Kingsville, I graduated from high school there in Kingsville, Texas, and I went on to Baylor. And then, of course, they continued to move. So Joel, my brother, went to high school in Clear Lake City, which is where Johnson Space Center was. So that is kind of the journey that I took anyway. And then I've been out here for a very, very long time.
Yes. Now, what made you pick Baylor?
Well, I had grown up an Alabama fan, believe it or not. Most of my parents are from Florence, Alabama, and I grew up during the end of the Bear Bryant era. So if you know anything about Alabama football, you know Bear Bryant was God in that part of the country, and it was Roll Tide Roll. And so I grew up as a fan, and when I was in Kingsville, it occurred to me, I guess my junior year, I started looking at pricing of different things, and I just presumed I would be going to Alabama, but I realized that it would cost me as an out-of-state student more to go to Alabama than it would to go to a very strong private school there in Texas. And I had some scholarships to a lot of different places, but I knew that I wanted, because of that love for football and sports, I knew I wanted to go to a school that had Division I football. And it was the Southwest Conference at that point. So the schools in the state there, obviously you had the state schools like Texas and A&M and Texas Tech, and private schools like TCU and SMU were there also. But I loved Baylor because it was a Division I school, but it wasn't as huge as, for instance, UT. I had a partial scholarship to Texas, but I think the student population at that point was about 35,000 in Austin, at UT Austin.
Huge school.
And the town of Kingsville, Texas was at the time 28,000. So I thought, okay, well, I don't want to get lost in the shuffle. Baylor just seemed like a great, a perfect compromise because it was strong academics. They valued the whole person. I had good test scores, so I was able to get in. But they are also, they were and still are all about community service and giving back and faith, obviously. So I thought that was a great place for me, and it was actually. I had the opportunity to participate in various activities there. It's small enough that you can get involved, but it's big enough that you can also, hide out if you want to and not have to be in the middle of everything. So it was a great place for me, and I love it. I made some great connections there, had wonderful professors, had some great mentors there at the time as well. So my experience there was fantastic.
Oh, good. Now, did you know right away that you wanted to go into sportscasting?
Well, and it's ironic that Ms. George just passed away this past weekend, but Phyllis George, I had always been a sports fan. I mean, I was totally a daddy's girl, and our Sundays consisted of basically going to church, coming home, having lunch, and watching the Cowboys on television. So I grew up in Dallas, even though I was born in D.C. So I was always a fan, but obviously, there weren't women doing sports at the time. When I was old enough to remember, though, I remember seeing Phyllis George on there, and she was talking to these guys about football, just like, my dad and I would talk about football, basically, probably a little more in depth than that. But at that point, I think something in my head was like, wow, that would be a really cool thing to be able to do. And obviously I kept that tucked away in my head. Jane Kennedy, of course, ended up doing similar things. But I also knew that I wasn't going to be Miss America or a 6-foot-tall, gorgeous creature, and be plunked down on television right away. But I, at Baylor, I met a gentleman named Frank Fallon, who at the time was the voice of the Baylor Bears for decades, very much revered, and he oversaw the Baylor broadcast crew, which was all students. He was, he basically started out doing play-by-play, and he trained everybody on how to do color, and then eventually gave people the opportunity to do a little play-by-play if they wanted to. At the time, there had never been a girl who had wanted to do that, but I stopped by, and I thought, well, maybe he'll let me be part of the crew. I wasn't even thinking in terms of being on the air at all. I was thinking, doing stats or going and gathering interviews. And he asked me, he said, well, don't you want to audition? And I said, well, can a girl audition? Are you going to let a girl try out? And he said, well, I'm not going to put you on the air if you're not any good, but I'll let you audition. And I auditioned. And as a sophomore, I became part of the Baylor baseball broadcast crew. And he was a wonderful champion for me. He never, ever treated me any differently than he did the guys. the guys were very embracing of me doing this. And again, I think because I over-researched everything and I knew what I was talking about, I think they did treat me as a peer. And they were also learning the same thing that I was. So it's not like anybody had any special skills and was, somebody else was intruding on their turf or anything like that. But he basically gave me that opportunity. And when I was a senior and I was starting to think about, what comes after graduation, basically, there still really weren't women doing sports. There was a woman on Sports Center, and obviously ESPN wasn't what it is now. There was a woman named Gail Gardner, who was one of the anchors.
Yep.
And I thought, wow. Yes. Oh, she's amazing. And at the time, women were very buttoned up and very, it was all about the suit and the collar and everything. It wasn't like it is so much today. But I thought, wow, that's great. But and I worked hard and I put together a demo tape. I actually did interview and got internships at both one of the local TV stations in the sports department and also in the sports information office at Baylor. And I love doing that kind of work too. I didn't really care about necessarily being on the air. I just wanted to work in sports in some capacity. Sure. And my degree, I'm not a broadcasting major. Baylor had an opportunity back in the day where you could get a degree through the business school and you could get one major through the business school and then the other major was kind of a hybrid. Mine was marketing was my main major and then business broadcasting, but it was more kind of the management side of broadcasting. Sure. But nonetheless, I thought, okay, well, I better have a degree that's useful in case I can't get into broadcasting. So I have the business degree. And when I got out, I had a hard time even getting any news directors to interview me because I was a female, and they were allowed to tell you that back then,
Oh, wow.
And I. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, again, this was, 1988, 89 to date myself.
Really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and I remember talking to, there's a man who's still on the air, actually, Dale Hansen. He was a very, very well-known anchor there in the Dallas area. And I had met him through the Southwest Conference basketball tournament. And he was so encouraging. And I was really discouraged because, I'd get news directors saying, hey, you've got a really good tape, but, I'm not going to interview you for sports. Do you want a news opportunity? And Dale was very sweet and said, listen, I want to tell you, when I got out of school and when I sent my tapes out, I probably sent out 100 tapes and got 100 no's. And he said, and now not any of those 100 people could afford to pay me what I'm making now. So he basically just gave me a great lesson in being persistent and not taking no as a no, but taking it as a not yet. And sure. I chose to do that. I did, in fact, I remember very clearly there was an interview I had in Abilene, Texas. There was finally a news director that let me come and interview for a job. And he said, yeah, you're really good. He said, quote, well, Sugar, I know we're not quite ready for a female sportscaster in Abilene, Texas, end quote, but he proceeded to offer me a part-time news job. But, I was like, I don't want to do news. I don't want to cover fires and murders. I want to cover sports. Yeah. So around that same time, I ended up meeting some people on a film in Galveston who were working on the crew who said, hey, if you ever want to, come visit LA, come on out, you can stay on our couch, check it out, that kind of thing. And I think it was a meant to be thing because I ended up coming out here, falling in love with it and moving out here. And the day my parents left, as I'm walking back into my condo going, okay, what have I done with my life? I'm here by myself now. There was a message on the machine from Wheel of Fortune, which was, Merv Griffin Enterprises was one of the places I had sent a resume. And they had an entry-level position, and I interviewed, and I ended up getting the job. And so that kind of led me on my television production journey. So I have lots of twists and turns, but bottom line, a few years later, like 15 years later, I ended up finally getting an opportunity in sports. So you just never know in this world where your path is going to lead you. So not always a straight line.
Now, Deb, I actually have a background in radio, but I worked behind the scenes. I worked in promotions and marketing, but my dream was always to, be behind the microphone, have my own show. Now, you've worked with some amazing people, and one of my favorites, I'm a huge fan of First Take and of Stephen A. Smith, and I know that you worked with Stephen A. Smith. Do you have any fun stories about him?
Honestly, I had a great experience working with him. It was very unique because they had actually his show at the time. It was a show that was on from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., which East Coast time is 6 to 9, so it was East Coast morning drive. They had brought in another woman to work with him, and I guess that wasn't working out. And honestly, it was kind of just a weird meant to be thing. I happened to be in. And I'd been, doing weekends and was very involved in all the shows on which I worked on the weekends. But I was in one morning filling in for the anchor that normally had that shift. And as soon as I did my first update at the top of the hour to open the show, he and I started talking on the air, and he, was basically, who are you and what are you doing here? And I think it was just one of those things where I didn't treat him any differently. He's essentially, we're contemporaries basically. So I wasn't intimidated by him. I think in radio, it is all about chemistry, as you both know.
Yes.
You can be incredibly talented, but if you're not compatible with whoever the co-host is, it's just not going to work out, and people can hear fake on the air, I think. And I think because we just, we were able to go back and forth about a lot of things, obviously mostly sports, and we talked a lot of hoops. We talked a lot of NFL. We talked a lot about Major League Baseball, but we were also able to talk about, the differences between the sexes and race relation type things. And, some of the things that were happening around that time, the Tiger and Elin Woods thing, we were able to talk about that a lot. And we obviously had a different perspective on that. But I had a great time. And I think part of it is because I do tend to over prepare, just because at Fox Sports Radio, whoever is sitting in that anchor seat has to be ready to carry the show if we lose the feed to whoever the host is. For instance, I'm on from Pacific time from 6 a.m. to noon. So that's during the Dan Patrick Show and during the Herd with Colin Cowherd. Dan Patrick is in Connecticut. If we lose the feed with him and the Danettes for a couple of minutes, somebody's got to be able to fill that time until we get him back. So that person is me. Yeah. And I think, I think, or I like to think, I guess I should say, that he respected the fact that I was, I was a lifelong sports fan. I wasn't somebody who was just looking for airtime. And I think also I could just go with the flow with him. I mean, I remember very vividly one morning when I had researched, I don't know, I'm just making the number up, but 10 NBA games and 6 top 25 college hoops games. I do my national sports report to open the show. And he said, okay, and he opened the show and he said, now, Deb, we're going to get to basketball in just a moment, but what do you think about this Arizona immigration law? And I mean, he was just out of the blue, and so, and that honestly, I had to wake up, for a year of my life, I woke up at midnight to be on the air at 3 a.m. So to me, if you're going to have to wake up at midnight, which is horrible for your health, if you're going to have to do that, to be in a position where you love the job and it's entertaining enough that you were just on your toes the whole time it was a great thing. So I enjoyed it. So it was a great experience for me. Yeah. So I know toward the end of the year, I know it was a grind for him because, he made his money and still does as an NBA insider. And it's pretty impossible to do that when you're having to wake up, for him, I think he was getting up at 4 a.m. So he's sleeping in compared to what I was doing. But he was, you can't get up at 4 for a year when you're trying to be out with the guys getting NBA scoops late at night. He did break during that year, though. That was when LeBron decided to take his talents to South Beach, and Stephen did break that on our show. And said that he heard that was going to happen. So it was a lot of fun. So, but yeah, I've had the chance to work with a lot of really, really great, interesting, talented people there at Fox Sports Radio.
So lucky.
Now, Deb, I think you have the best IMDb account of any person that is a sportscaster on TV. Why don't you talk about your amazing career in TV, movies? You have done it all. Why don't you talk about some things that you've been involved with?
Oh, thank you. Well, the fun thing, and I'll get back to this. It all started with the Wheel of Fortune days, essentially. Back when I started there, we were doing not just the nighttime show, but also the daytime show. So every other weekend, we were working 4 days, from Thursday through Sunday, and then I was on the production staff. So we were in the office, technically every Monday through Friday. So I accumulated a lot of comp days because, I was working a lot of Saturdays and Sundays. So because I was, at the time I was young and in LA and, you're just around a lot of things. So you do get a lot of opportunities. So basically what I decided to do once I started, I had an offer for somebody to be my print agent. I did a lot of print ads. I did a lot of Mattel mom type stuff, believe it or not. So I did some mommy type packages. I did stand-in work. I did, but I got my SAG card doing an episode of LA Law, and that was because the show was doing an episode or a few episodes with LA Law, on which one of the attorneys, Brackman, I think the name was of the character, it was Alan Rachen's character. He was basically a contestant on Wheel of Fortune. So in helping coordinate the LA Law shoot with Wheel of Fortune, I got to know some of the producers, and one of them said, hey, are you interested in, do you do on-camera stuff? And I said, yes. And he said, hey, do you want to come audition for, and it was just one line. And I'm thinking, really, I have to audition for one line? But, that was my naive self, not realizing that there are millions of people here in LA that are like, trying to kill for a line on anything.
Yeah.
But they made me go through the hoops. They made me come in and do the line. They made me go to another audition, a producer's audition, they call it, and do it there. So that's how I got my SAG card. So I did an episode there. And honestly, I just had a lot of comp time, and I've had over the years some really fun agents who, one of my favorites, in fact, was my agent called and said, in fact, this was during the Stephen A. Smith show years. She said, hey, they want to know if you want to do a day on Dexter. And at the time I had been like binge watching Dexter, and I was like, are you kidding me? And I'm thinking, and they're going to pay me to do Dexter? So I ended up doing 3 episodes actually of Dexter, but that was a fun episode or a fun experience. I got to sit there and talk, in between shoots. There were a couple of the actors on the show were hardcore fantasy football fans, and so we talked fantasy football in between takes. I got a chance to work on a show called The Unit, and there's an actor, Dennis Haysbert. A lot of people know him more from, the Allstate commercials, but in between takes, we were talking Pac-12 football, the whole time. So I just love, I'm very curious by nature, and I think it's the production background and the business background. I love to see how things come together. So the opportunity to do those sorts of things is a lot of fun. One of the last things I did a couple of episodes of Lethal Weapon when they brought that back.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You were on the TV show, The Lethal Weapon. Yeah. So now I wanted to ask you also, Deb, how in the heck could you be on a show? And I don't get this in Hollywood. I don't get a lot of things about Hollywood, but how could you be uncredited if you're in a show? How come they don't give you credit?
I'm not sure. Well, what do you mean?
It'll say you were in The Young and the Restless, but it's uncredited. Right. What does that mean?
Well, sometimes there are some people who just choose not to be credited on some shows. I know there are some people, I don't think the stigma is there anymore. I think there are some people who ask not to be credited on, they don't necessarily want to be affiliated with certain kinds of shows. I don't think there's any stigma at all. But I did not ask that. I have not looked at my IMDb profile in a while.
We're going to contact them.
No, I love them. I did a few episodes of Young and the Restless. Maybe I'm uncredited because the character didn't have a name, or maybe the IMDb. Yeah, I've always had a name, or at least like reporter number 1, or something like that.
Yeah, but, Reporter Carson.
Sure. Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe just the people at IMDb don't know the name of the character. And sometimes on a soap opera too, they don't run credits every single day. I think they run full credits once a week. So on an episodic TV show, like Law and Order, or like Lethal Weapon, they do run credits that's a mandate by the union. They do run credits, but on soap operas, I think they really only run the full credits once a week. It's that way on game shows
too. Very rare. Yeah, true. It's very rare to see credits in a soap.
Yeah, did you get to meet Merv Griffin?
I did when I was working for Wheel of Fortune. Not very often, but I met him a few times. We had, in fact, when I was there, we were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the nighttime show, the syndicated show, and I think now they're in year 30 or 40 or something like that. But we had a big gala at the Beverly Hilton. He used to own the Beverly Hilton, and his production offices were there at the Beverly Hilton too. So met him there. We also, when we took the show on remote to several places when I was working there. One of them was to Walt Disney World there, the Disney MGM Grand in Orlando. So he came down there with us. He didn't come to the set that often, but I don't know if it's because the show had been on so many years by that time. He probably, when I first started on the show, the production offices were still there on Vine Street, and they moved. I guess I had been with the show for about 3 months when we moved over to Burbank. But they used to be at a building called the TAV building, and Merv, I think, had offices there. So it may have been different way back in the day, but no, he wasn't there regularly. But Merv, you may have heard this, he got, I think, 5 different checks for every episode of Wheel of Fortune. He got a check as the creator. He got a credit for writing the music. He got a credit as a writer because, believe it or not, back then he actually did approve every single puzzle that was ever on the show. He had to, he had to give it the thumbs up every puzzle, which is crazy. And I can't remember what the other categories were, but I remember hearing that he, again, he made a lot of money.
What?
So,
and
very fascinating life.
On Forbes, he's still worth $1 billion. His estate. He is just absolutely what a smart, iconic guy in television. Total heavyweight.
Absolutely.
Really ahead of his time with that. But Deb, now we talked off air about some of the things that were near and dear to your heart. Why don't you talk to and tell our listeners a couple of things that you are about? And again, her website's debcarson.com. We're going to be sharing that, especially in regards to your father.
Well, my father, as you've heard me say already in our talk here, he was not only obviously an amazing father, but he was the main influence probably in me loving sports as much as I do. And I'm sure part of it had to do with just loving to spend time with him. But when I was little, he would take me, when we lived in the D.C. area, the Nationals weren't there yet, and the Senators had already left. So he used to take me out to the old Memorial Ballpark in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And, we'd go sit in the cheap seats and watch the Orioles play. And this was during the Jim Palmer, Lee May, Al Bumbry, Don Baylor, the Earl Weaver era, obviously.
Great teams.
And yeah, absolutely. And I just have such fond memories of, sitting out in the cheap seats and him teaching me how to keep score, just on the old scorecards that they used to put in the program. And I think that's still one of my earliest memories. That, and as I said, we'd come home on Sunday afternoons and watch the Cowboys. And again, this during the Tom Landry era, during the, Roger Staubach, Too Tall Jones, Tony Dorsett era. So, but Dad was amazing. He was a great dad. We were always very close. He also was incredibly healthy in that, I think in his early 20s, and I was born when they were, in their early 20s. He was working a lot of hours and ended up having high blood pressure. So I think at that point, and this is back in the 70s, he decided to, this is in the early days of people going out jogging. So he started jogging, and for decades, he would jog 3 to 5 miles a day. He was always very fit. And even once he got into his late 60s, he would, his ankles and knees kind of got tired of the jogging for decades, but he would get out and walk 6 to 8 miles every morning. And one morning, and it was just before 4th of July weekend in 2015, my mom woke up and he was laying on the couch, and he hadn't really been out for his jog yet. He had his clothes on to go out for his walk. I mean, not jog. And he said, I just don't feel well. And she said, well, that's not like you. Even when you're sick, you usually go out and get some fresh air. But he didn't feel quite right. And then the next morning, same thing. And Mom said, you know what, you look a little jaundiced. You look a little bit yellow. And, gallbladder issues are not uncommon in the part of the country where they were raised.
Sure.
And so that was kind of, both of them kind of immediately assumed that's what that was. But on that Sunday of 4th of July weekend, finally, I guess it was just so painful. And Mom took him into the hospital and he was examined and the gallbladder came back clean. And so they decided to do a full scan and the doctor saw a mass on his pancreas and said, listen, my surgeon self who has God complex would love to say, okay, let's go ahead and take that out. He said, but I know if I was you, I would want you to send me up to Birmingham, which is where the UAB has a comprehensive cancer center there. So he went up there and was diagnosed. And unfortunately, it was already stage 4 pancreatic cancer because there were just a couple of spots on his liver. And obviously, once it has metastasized beyond its organ of origin, it's classified as stage 4. So he went through chemo and it was really hard, obviously, because as soon as I heard pancreatic cancer, obviously I didn't know a lot about that, but I know, oh gosh, that's one of the bad ones. That was my first reaction, and I didn't say anything, obviously, on the phone. But he went through chemo. He was doing really well. I mean, he was lethargic, obviously, but I think what was hardest for me, and still is hard for me, is that his tumor marker numbers were coming down. And so his doctor was incredibly optimistic. He's like, oh, the tumor's shrinking. This is a great sign. But between the time I saw him, I would say his birthday was October 11th. So but between the time I saw him then and saw him again 3 or 4 weeks later, he was just suddenly emaciated looking. And the chemo basically is what ultimately took him, because he passed away. It was about 5 months from the time of diagnosis. So even though his tumor marker numbers were coming down, essentially the chemotherapy just caused massive organ failure. So we lost him in December of 2015. But in November, Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month was coming up. So I decided at that point, okay, I don't have millions of dollars to donate. I didn't know a lot about this disease other than, it's one of the bad ones. What can I do to make a difference? So I decided that every day in November that year, every day I would post something with the hashtag Purple for a Purpose. I would wear something purple. I would, show a wristband that was purple. I would post something that was purple just to try to raise awareness for pancreatic cancer awareness and obviously research dollars as well. And I also became more involved with the Hirschberg Foundation for Pancreatic Cancer Research, just because they really do focus most of their resources on research, because it's devastating. Because by the time a family finds out, or by the time a patient finds out they have pancreatic cancer, generally it's too late, because if you're, when the cancer is still in stage 1 or stage 2, you really don't have any symptoms. And most patients don't have any symptoms until it's already to stage 3 or stage 4. And that is why there's still just a single-digit 5-year survival rate with that kind of cancer. So we're just trying to raise awareness, and the Hirschberg Foundation sends out a lot of money in grants to researchers trying to find a cure. They're working on a couple of case studies right now with just basically a saliva swab. And obviously, we're in a time of COVID-19. So unfortunately, a lot of people have stopped donating to their quote unquote normal charities, and they're giving money for, COVID-19 research, which is obviously a noble cause as well.
Sure.
But the main thing is just trying to find an early detection method. That's kind of my goal. And that's where I'm just trying to raise awareness and trying to raise research dollars so that we can find an early detection method, so that it's as easy as having surgery and getting the tumor taken out, or basically just stopping it before it metastasizes. So
Yeah, it's a horrendous. There's two types, and one of them is very bad, and one of them there's a higher survival rate. But this has taken, and some people will say, okay, pancreatic cancer, but this has taken people like Steve Jobs at 56, Michael Landon at 55, the great dancer Juliet Prowse, Patrick Swayze, Alex Trebek is fighting it now. So you have a lot of people that are, and these are people at very young ages. Some of them live pretty healthy lifestyle, and they were gone fairly quickly. So this is one of those diseases that research is key, and we're going to be promoting this. And again, their website is www.pancreatic.org, and this is the Hirschberg Foundation. So please go check it out. And it's one of those diseases. I'm in the medical field, and it's one of those, again, that it's kind of one of those where, like you said, by the time you find out, it's almost halfway too late. And we have to get detection. We have to get be able to find it at a much earlier age. Now, on a little bit happier note, we have the Boys and the Girls Clubs that you were involved with, the West Valley and the Santa Monica. Why don't you give a quick shout out to them and why it means so much to you?
Absolutely. Well, obviously, the cliche is the children are our future, but it's not a cliche because they are. And every child deserves a chance to be educated. Every child deserves a chance to feel valued. And the Boys and Girls Club, for those of you who don't know, they do such a valuable service, not just for the kids, but also there are a lot of families who are club families who really, this is a safe place where their child can be and can learn and can thrive and can make friends, so that the parents can go out and make a living and support their family. A lot of club families have 2 and 3 jobs. And if the child wasn't at the Boys and Girls Club, they'd be sitting at home and maybe not such a great environment and have a chance to be influenced by not the greatest of characters. So they do an amazing job. They also, the chances of teen pregnancy, for instance, for girls that are involved in the Boys and Girls Club is drastically lower than your average teenager. Chance of college graduation is so much higher. And a chance of high school, obviously, graduation is phenomenal when kids are involved. Especially the West Valley Boys and Girls Club and the Santa Monica Boys and Girls Clubs are the ones that I've been most involved with. They do a lot of, they do a lot of fundraising because they provide so many services. Even right now, while the clubs are not able to be open because of COVID-19, the West Valley Boys and Girls Club is providing grab-and-go meals, breakfast and lunches, so that kids can have food in their tummies. A lot of the kids are LAUSD, LA Unified School District kids, who would normally be getting, free or reduced lunches and breakfasts at schools. Obviously, since the schools are closed, where are they going to get fed? So the Boys and Girls Club, particularly this one, is doing what they can to provide meals for not even just the club kids, any kid that comes and needs food. They provide it, the grab and go, obviously in a safe environment. Everybody's masked and has the gloves on. But if you would visit www.wvbcg.org, that's West Valley Boys and Girls Club. So again, that's wvbgc.org. And I've also, I do a lot of emceeing of their benefits, had the opportunity to MC they had their first comics for kids this last November, that Jay Leno came and performed in order to bring attention and bring fun.
Oh, wow.
And hopefully things will get back to a situation where we can have it again this November. Dana Carvey is going to be the comedian that comes and helps raise funds for the club. But they do such an amazing job. Yeah, and wherever you're listening, I'm sure the Boys and Girls Clubs in your area are probably struggling as well. So do whatever you can. Honestly, guys, Jim and Florence, my main thing, if you want to call it, to me, you're here for a reason. Whether you have a platform, whether you have money, whether you just have kind words to offer to people, our purpose in being here is to help other people, to take care of each other wherever you are, whatever you can do for anybody. If it's a neighbor down the street who is 80 and can't go to the grocery store because she may catch a disease in this day and age,
Yeah.
Anything you can do for somebody, whether it's, donating to the Boys and Girls Club or helping Miss Ethel down the street or taking picking the fruit off your fruit tree because you've got way too much anyway and just taking it to a food bank. Do whatever you can to take care of each other, especially right now.
Yeah, we're totally inspire and support is what we always say. So we're going to let you go. We know you're super busy and you've had a long day, but after we get off the air, we wanted to ask you something real quick, Deb, but we wanted to thank you for being on the show. You're absolute delight, and we are going to be sharing all these things off and on during the next few weeks, so make sure that you support her. And like she said, just pay it forward, help someone, inspire someone, and when you do, you better yourself as well, because in this day and age when there's so much negativity and the news isn't that much fun to watch sometimes, you could really change a life by just showing some kindness and some compassion.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Deb, for being on. You're just amazing. We thought you'd be awesome, but you were better.
Oh, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Florence, and you guys keep up the great work as well.
We will. Thank you so much, and stick with us, Deb. We wanted to ask you something after, but thank you all for listening. We so appreciate everybody, and you guys have a good, safe weekend during the Memorial holiday. Take care, everyone.